Dennis,
Good morning.
how are you?
I am doing great. It's freezing cold here in Kansas City.
It
I am
is.
not in the Sistine Chapel where it's probably warm and wonderful, but it feels like it's 10 below. How are you doing, Stephanie?
I'm well, just despite being cold. I'm using the beautiful spring background of our beautiful St. Teresa's Academy campus. It's a
It-
beautiful spring day, and I'm just going to tell myself that. So it'll be warm in my heart.
Well, it's beautiful, and it reminds me of the good old days when it was warm. Well, thank you for introducing and leading the way today.
You are most welcome. So I'm letting everyone log on. We got people logging on right now, and we'll get started in just a bit. Today's webinar is titled Specific Action Steps for Your Fall Campaign, sharing insights from over 25 years of experience and over 200 capital campaigns.
So this morning, Stephanie, I spoke with a church down in Terlingua, the
Oh,
southernmost point of Texas. It wasn't a church, it was a member of a church thinking about a capital campaign. And it was 75 degrees at 8 a.m. this morning, and apparently it will get warmer. Made me thought, gosh, I would love to be in Terlingua, Texas, broadcasting live at this moment.
I would love to be right there alongside too.
Yeah, yeah. Oh,
Wow,
God.
what a discrepancy. It's about 10 degrees right now in Kansas City, Missouri.
And yesterday I was communicating with a gentleman in Fargo, where it's colder than it is in Kansas City and more snowy. And I feel like Steve is a much more rugged person than I could ever hope to be for adopting to that climate.
Well, I think that's probably what it takes to survive.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's leap into action.
All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here at Church Development. Today's webinar is titled Specific Action Steps for Your Fall Campaign. And let's go ahead. Sharing these slides, we always send out a link to the slides as well as the recorded webinar about 24 hours after the webinar is completed. And that way you can take a look at it again if you have a question that maybe you wanted to look at again, or if you want to pass this on to colleagues or friends, you can pass on that email that I will send out to you tomorrow. And our past webinars can be viewed as well on our website, and we have a YouTube channel as well. Look for Church Development. So while you don't need to email us to get the slides, because we're going to automatically do that if you signed up, you may email us if you have any questions, comments, anything else that we may be able to help you with. Email is office@church/development. And you can also call Dennis, and that's his direct line that he listed there. And you'll get those slides, so you don't have to write that down if you do want to give him a call. Today's agenda, specific action steps for your fall campaign. So Dennis is going to talk first of all about 3 capital campaign disasters you're going to want to avoid, and then what you do want to do. First of all, what is your vision, and getting consensus on that. 2, identifying major donors for your campaign. 3, the feasibility study, which will be the blueprint for your campaign plan. 4, the #1 secret to giving. And 5, prayer activities. And then the action, the takeaway will be the calendar of activities for your capital campaign. Now, if you haven't seen it already, we did set up some questions for you in the polling. If you could take a moment to fill that out. There are 3 polling questions. What do you want Dennis to focus on in this webinar? We have an agenda, but what are your concerns particularly? 2, what is your greatest concern? And if you have a concern that maybe we didn't list in that multiple choice, feel free to put it down in a chat box. And 3, how imminent is your campaign? Were we looking at 1 month, 3, 6, 9 months, a year, or maybe you don't know? So what I always like to tell people is feel free to use the chat in the Q&A section. We will do our best to get everyone's questions answered. And if you have any success stories, we certainly would love to hear that as well. A little background about us. Church Development was founded in 1992. Our mission is to increase generosity without fundraising. And we have helped raise over $200 million in church capital campaigns and many more millions in annual stewardship giving. How church development is different from other church capital campaign consultants. First of all, our approach is based in scripture and 30 years of both research and experience. The ask is based in prayer and discernment, not on pressure. We typically see increased weekly giving for 3 years after the completion of a capital campaign, and planned giving programs begin after the capital campaign. Our whole basis of what we think about every time we get started on a campaign, like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. Dennis Green is our founding president and CEO of Church Development. He has over 30 years experience. He has helped raise over $200 million for over 100 clients. He is a husband, a father, a cancer survivor. He is the author of the book titled Stewardship System, How to Increase Generosity Without Fundraising. And if you haven't seen that, we do have an ebook of that on our website. Feel free to download that if you're interested at no cost. And he's published research as well. And I'm going to pass it over to Dennis. Dennis? Oh, Dennis, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Well, and thank you for getting the ball rolling and introducing me. I think of myself as an absent-minded professor because my focus has been so much on collecting data on what works over the course of many years. And I'm teased mercilessly about it by my wife, who says I can go 0 to boring in 2.7 seconds, and my children. All roads lead back to statistics, they say. So this could be a much more interesting webinar if you ask lots of questions, because I've got a lot of stories too that I can share with you based on 200 capital campaigns over the more than 30 years. Actually, my first church client was in 1983. Okay, doesn't that make me, I know you're thinking that's when he was born, but no, it makes me an ancient fossil. So I've raised lots and lots of money and collected lots of research, and I'm giving it away to you. And you can, I'll send you the books, like we wrote this book, The Stewardship System, which I've got here somewhere. And we also have an online resource that we'll give away to you as well, weekly and monthly activities and resources you can use. And the Stewardship-Based Church Capital Campaign book will give that to you. I also borrow a lot from academia. My favorite is Daniel Kahneman, who got a Nobel Prize in behavioral economics. So we borrow heavily from academia and the corporate world. Bottom line, number 5, that's the organizations that I have belonged to over the course of many years. The International Catholic Stewardship Council, the National Association of Church Business Administrators, which has now been renamed the Church Network, the Support Centers of America, the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners, the Association of Fundraising Professionals. Both my undergraduate and my graduate studies were in this subject. And as Stephanie mentioned a moment ago, the International Journal of Innovation, Education, and Research, Volume 5, number 8, published the research I did with Dr. Maria Hunt on the cognitive strategies of consistently high-performing innovators. So it gave us insight into how people make decisions. So I'm going to share all of this with you. But first, we should talk about why. You know, always begin with the why. I love that. In 1979, I took a 5-day float trip down the Congo River. My first job after college was working for the American Embassy in Kinshasa, Zaire, and 2 of my buddies and I took this float trip down the Congo, and we ended up at this spot. That's a picture of me there with the beard, and that little yellow and brown tent is where I slept. This picture was taken just right after a miracle happened. We're facing south in this picture. We pitched our tent there, and I walked north, and I didn't know it, but I was walking into Cabinda, province of Angola, that was in the midst of a civil war. And as you can see from the picture, I know you have to suspend your disbelief to imagine me with hair and a beard and tan. Well, I had green pants on too. And unfortunately, I looked like a Cuban mercenary who was a participant in that war. And at the base of the cliffs, just a couple miles that way from this picture, these two gentlemen were going to execute me. And they spoke a little bit of French. They felt like they had captured a bad guy. And they interrogated me for 2 hours. And when the younger one said to the older one, "We need to get on with our day," and he cocked his gun and he pointed at me to kill me, I realized that I might now die. And, as a 22-year-old reprobate, you would think the prayer that would come out of a person in that circumstance, an immature, self-centered person, would be, "Dear God, let's make a deal. If you save my life, I promise I'll be good." That's not what came out of me. What came out of me as I closed my eyes and pointed my soul upward was, "Dear God, into your hands I commend my soul." It was very interesting because a miracle happened. 2 miracles happened at that moment. Number one, they didn't kill me. As I sat there, eyes closed for a moment, I could no longer hear the ocean splashing against the shore, or smell the salt water, or feel the breeze or the sun on my back. I was empty. I thought I died. I thought they'd shot me in the head and I died, but they didn't, of course. I opened my eyes after a moment and I realized they are still here. And at that moment, they were peaceful. They had lowered their weapons. And the younger of the two said, "Allez, va-t'en," which in French means shoo, get on out of here. So I did. I laid on out of there quickly as I could, running down the beach, thinking, well, they're probably going to shoot me in the back. Well, they didn't. So I ran breathlessly till I got back here to this spot. And that's when the second miracle started to happen. The direction of my soul changed from being just a self-centered reprobate to really the consideration, that I'm connected to every other person on this planet. What could I do to make the world a better place instead of a worse place? And that's what led to me doing this work. So years later, another inexplicable thing happened. This is when my wife was, I met my wife. I bought a t-shirt from her at a charity event. And then we started dating quite a while after that. But I'd known her for a year when she introduced me to her brother. And he said, "Actually, I remember you from when we were kids. Actually, I remember because we went to the same swimming pool. Actually, I remember when Jenny was 6 years old. She was on the high dive and I was yelling at her to get down. She was too little." So as she turned around and he said, "You went to that same swimming pool." I said, "Yes, I remember that. It was Ward Parkway Pool." He said, "I remember when Jenny was 6, she was on the high dive. I told her, turn around and get down. You're too little." So as she turned to come down, she slipped and fell face first, 10 feet towards the concrete. And her brother pointed at me and gave me one of these in the chest. And he says, "As you put your hands on the ladder to go up the high dive, you caught her." And I looked at Jenny and Jenny looked at me. She says, "That was you?" And I said to her, "That was you?" And her brother said, "Oh yeah, that was him. That was 22 years ago. You owe him your life. He saved you your life. He saved your life." And I'm thinking to myself, this is the craziest thing I've ever experienced. And furthermore, perhaps she'll say yes now. This might work out. So that's inexplicable. And then after that, my daughter, Kellyanne, who's 17 now, was doing a cartwheel. She was a little kid at the time, doing a cartwheel in the living room. I come in from the dining room. She kung fu's me right in the gut, 100 miles an hour. And it hurt so bad, I go to the doctor. Doctor does a scan and says, "Well, she didn't break anything, but she kicked you precisely in the location where you have a 10 millimeter tumor." 10 millimeter is little. He said, "Yeah, well, lucky we caught it. So we'll be scheduling surgery for you tomorrow, and then there will be radiation, and we'll see how it goes from there." So in retrospect, I feel like I need a new definition of God. These things profoundly shook me. I no longer thought of God as an old man sitting on a chair dispensing vengeance from afar, but rather God being a real active force in my life, and not a force out there, but a force with whom I have an intimate relationship, a partnership with, that I can work with to make the world a better place. So what better way to do it than to help communities of faith pull together, to be in consensus, to be joined together, seeking their version of doing God's will, which in every case is unique and different, just like a human being. So for the past 30 or so years, this has been a delightful work that I have done, and I've made many friends. It's been a lot of fun. So we're going to cover a lot of ground today, and your feedback is extraordinarily important to me. And I'm looking at that feedback right now on my screen, the poll results. So how to get consensus, feasibility study, proactivity is pretty low, but counter event seems to be the winner. Okay, so I will focus on the specific activities. What is your greatest concern? The financial considerations? Okay, well then that's what I'm going to focus on. Personnel, less so, and decision making. Okay, so those are the two high ranking items. Okay, thank you for giving me those instructions. I will focus. How imminent is yours? Well, a few people right now, next month, 6 months greater, and the largest group is unsure. Well, good. This is really good feedback. Thank you very much. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to jot that down. The most important concerns being financial and decision making. Okay, and then the unsureness of timing. Well, I think I can help you as you do your planning. Okay, and we're going to focus in tremendous detail on calendar. Okay, so thanks. Now, I would welcome your feedback as we go. And you can do that in the chat box. You can do it through the Q&A. I have Stephanie on my side helping me, feeding me those things. Now, to inspire you, remember that I'm old and I have a ton of experience. And if you follow this model, you're going to raise 300% to 700% of annual giving in 3-year pledges. So you can do the math right now. Take a pen, write it down. Now, you do not have to follow this model. But if you don't, you're just going to raise less money. Okay, and I'm assuming you want to raise the maximum amount of money. So not only will you raise the maximum amount of money, your regular weekly giving will increase by at least 10%. Daryl Prater, my co-worker, just finished a campaign for St. Margaret's, and I'm struggling to remember the numbers, but I'm pretty sure that I'm all right. They raised 300% of annual giving, and I think this was our third capital campaign for that parish. 300% of annual giving in 3-year pledges. And then their annual giving, I believe, went up by 20%, not 10, but 20. So that a widespread increase in the number of people who participated in making pledges. And then furthermore, there was a diocesan campaign going on, annual campaign, and they went over their parish goal as well. And we have a lot of case studies, and I'll be sharing those through the day, but I can give you a ton more case studies. All you have to do is ask. We got a ton of resources and we give it away all the time. Now, under A level C, is a very surprising benefit is that we have an increase in planned giving too. When we're allowed to, 12 months after the capital campaign, Commitment Sunday, we launch a planned giving effort in which we ask everyone to remember the parish in their plan, in their estate plan. Pardon me. Now, 70% of the population has no estate plan. So this is an opportunity to engage them and get their estate planning going. We provide a lot of resources, and we provide an ask as well. And we provide a deadline, and this doesn't cost anything to a parish. If they do a capital campaign, they do this for free. So we have a lot of case studies where we raise as much in estate intentions as we do in the capital campaign, which preceded it, which is fairly remarkable. Now, the downside, of course, is you do not get those funds immediately. I mean, an estate plan is really the disposition of assets upon the person's matriculation to the great beyond. So it's not a rush, but they do happen, and none of them are small gifts. Now, I offer to you as an example, St. Anne's, again, Daryl, organized by my coworker, Daryl Prater. He's kind of the superhero of church development. He's our most successful consultant, and I brag about him all the time. He managed these campaigns. St. Anne's Parish, 7 times annual giving. And we had some significant problems right in the middle of the campaign, but things went well. At the end, we raised, imagine if you could raise 7 times annual giving. St. Augustine Episcopal, I really like this because we had such a good relationship with the architect going through RDG in Omaha. I don't have any financial relationship with them. I'm just fans. When I find somebody I like, I tell the world about them. And we still do. We have an ongoing relationship where we volunteer and give away our services to churches as they're doing their planning for free. St. Grace Presbyterian in Denver, 3 campaigns without ceasing. The fact that we had sustained interest and devotion and generosity. These things are not by accident. Frequently we're hired after somebody else has done a campaign on their own or hired somebody else. And we have such a gentle approach. They're ready for a gentle approach. And it turns out we raise the most amount of money through this gentle prayer-based approach. Now, if you don't do it, we also keep track of abject failures. And that number A there is the norm for failure is to raise 50% of annual giving in 3-year pledges. And that, like to the right, is a train wreck. It's a bummer. I remember when my daughter asked me about metaphors and similes and analogies. She said, "Now what? These are all kind of related. What do they mean?" I said, "Well, you could say, for instance, my life is a train wreck." She says, "Okay, but what's a metaphor?" It's a little comedian. So failure is kind of easy. And it takes a real deliberate focus to not be a failure. And it's unfair to say you only have one chance, but you only have one chance right now. Then you're locked in for the next 3 years. You can't go back and say, "Oh, do over." No. So if you're going to do a 3-year campaign, people make their 3-year pledges, and you pretty well got to stick with this. So another horrifying negative consequence is that regular giving goes down. That is a disaster. We can never let that happen. We have to turn on the lights and pay for the heat. So you have to be prudent and you have to be thorough. So there's huge benefits if you do the right thing, and there are huge benefits if you don't. And I'm just going to give all the right things to you just right now. So let us begin. The 3 capital campaign disasters that you need to avoid are surprise. I remember the experience of a church where one day the church business administrator stood at the pulpit and said, "Okay, I've been doing some planning. Here's what we need to do, and you need to give." And I was at the back of the church, and I noticed that everybody was doing this, looking around like, "What? I didn't know any of this. Did you know any of this?" So they're surprised about the focus, and they're surprised about fundraising. So surprise is a really cute emotion to see in the face of a baby. It's a horrible emotion to see in the face of a member or a donor. So we've got to start planning right this second for fundraising we're going to do long into the future. Okay, we have to plant those seeds through engagement, and I'll be really detailed about this as we go. Number 2, it can't be one person. That church business administrator, who I know is a good person in their soul, just made an enormous faux pas. This is a huge mistake. So who is the pilot of this? Who is involved? Who is our leader in this? And how do I know them? So when we do a capital campaign, I'm just looking. I have a whole bunch of capital campaign brochures here. One of the things that we always do is we will just have a whole page devoted to the names of volunteers who are involved. So if I'm not directly involved, I need to know 5 or 7 or 10 other people who are directly involved. This research comes from a seminal book on persuasion called Influence, and the author's name is Cialdini. There are 6 factors for persuasion, and they follow the acronym RUSLAV: reciprocity, urgency, social proof, likability, authority, and values. So I'm a big believer in science. I'm inspired by scripture, but boy, the balance of faith and reason. I think St. Augustine was onto something. So let us use the resources that God has given us. Social proof is absolutely critical. So we don't want to surprise people. We don't want to do this in an isolation all alone, one or two people, but we want widespread engagement. Now you're beginning to see themes that I will repeat over and over again to help you prepare for your capital campaign. And then point number 3, professional versus partial. A professional job really just, it takes more work, it takes more effort, takes more energy, takes more everything. But the return on investment is about $25 raised for every $1 that is spent. So is it worth it? Yeah, it's totally worth it. Takes time, takes effort, takes energy, but you might as well, if you're going to do it, you might as well do it right. So let's begin with the very first step, getting consensus on the direction that you are heading. Now, in all of these, I recommend that you engage a professional. Get a paid professional facilitator. Now, the scene portrayed in this picture is a very normal one. It could be here in an intimate setting. It could be in your parish hall. It could be in a gym. It could be in your worship space. But there are going to be a lot of people and they're going to be focused, and it cannot be random. It has got to be facilitated professionally. If you don't have a volunteer in your midst who has done this many times before, then go pay somebody. So it is not a free-for-all. I have been through the training, the formal scientific term for group, the science of group facilitation is synectics. And they teach very important skills and awarenesses, like some people are introverts and are uncomfortable speaking in public. So how can we facilitate their input? Some people are extroverts. I'm an extrovert. My wife is an extrovert. We talk too much. So how do you tamp down the extroverts? How do you lift up the introverts? How do you get input from everyone? Okay, once you got the process down, then you got to follow this sequence under 1, A, B, and C. We have to present the challenge that we exist. So right now I'm talking to a pastor in a northern suburb of Denver who is right at this spot. And they have a real clear challenge. They've outgrown their building, and it's an old building and it's kind of falling apart. So that's where you begin. Here is the problem, and I'm going to define it with these parameters. Then the next thing I want to talk about is remind people what is our mission and our vision. And the mission is never to have a country club where it just serves the members. It is essential that we're outwardly focused, and we're here to serve the community. Within 3 miles of your church, more than 50% of the people don't have a church home, and they need a church home. So that's almost all of our vision. We are here to serve, to welcome in those, and to do ministry, to make the world, to live out the gospel, to make the world a better place, to be of service. So once we present the challenge or the problem and remind people of our mission and vision, and then we brainstorm, and that's total chaos. I mean, the best thing you can do is have a flip chart with people writing, and you fill up these ideas, and pretty soon consensus begins to emerge. And I would never let this activity go more than an hour to an hour and a half. If it goes beyond that, it just begins to get repetitive. After an hour and a half, you got to wrap it up after the brainstorming. And then you follow up and you say, okay, the next thing that's going to happen, you're going to get a newsletter and a survey where we're going to ask you to help us narrow these many ideas into a few priorities. Now, SurveyMonkey, anybody done that? It's free. Okay, it takes no time to do. So we want to start wide open and then narrow it down to priorities. Once we've got those, we're going to send out another newsletter and say to people, here's what we learned from you. We have learned from you. You have helped us prioritize. Come to the next town meeting where we will present what we have learned. We're going to report and we're going to discuss it. Now, if we don't have consensus, we're going to do the same thing over again. We're going to do more listening, and we're going to do more prioritizing with a survey. Now, once you have that, then you go to the formal leadership body of your church for their blessing. So whether it's a board or a committee or the elders or the session, everybody's got a different, or the vestry. Then they affirm your direction. Okay. This doesn't take a whole ton of time. It shouldn't take a year or 2 years. I mean, I've been part of churches where they've done this in a month. So it's conceivable. You just have to get going. This is generally, you might serve a committee, but just as generally the purview of the leadership body of the church, whether it's a committee, the elders, the session, or the vestry. It's generally their job to be the servant of the vision. Robert Greenleaf coined the term servant leader, which I dearly love. And he says that's the job of the board, the vision. And the chief executive or the pastor is the chief servant of the vision. I confess to thinking in mythological term, it would be Sisyphus. Okay, who's defining the boulder and the hill? And it is our chief executive pastor, and it is the vestry or the session or the board to continually striving to achieve that vision. Now, let me shift from the big picture philosophical to something extraordinarily concrete that I would propose to be your next step, which could be the step you choose to take right now in advance. It's not expensive, it is not time consuming, but extraordinarily common sense and down to earth. The gift range chart, that's a professional fundraising term, which means the statistical profile of a capital campaign. And almost all campaigns, I'm going to say 99%, look like this. And yours might not, but it probably will. Where if we take a random amount, $1 million, because that's easy to do math, yours might be less, it might be more, but the percentages apply. It would be normal for one donor to give 10% of the entire amount raised, 10 donors to give 4% each, or 40% of the total. Now, you're probably better at math than I am, but just by adding level 1 and level 2, so we're now at 11 donors, we've raised 50% of the total amount of money that we will raise. The third strata might be 100 donors. They might give 0.4%. That might add up to 40% on that layer. And if that applies to you, you might have raised 80% of the funds from your top 111 donors. This is a gross simplification. This is a gross generalization, but it is the Pareto principle applied to fundraising. The 80-20 rule might be worse than that. It might be 90% of the money from 10% of the donors, or 99%. But it behooves you to have this paradigm just implanted in your capital campaign planning process. So respect that. So then the question becomes, well, who might be our number one? Who might be in our top 10? Who might be in our top 100? So there's two ways to determine that. Your past giving, and then number 2, research. Past giving is quite easy. Just ask the treasurer to print out the names, stratified. It's not something we want to burden the pastor with so much, but whoever's planning the capital campaign, yes, we shall burden them with that. And we want to make sure that they are invited to become involved in the capital campaign. Now, you may pay for research as well. For many, many decades, we have paid for research, and we ask a church, would you like to do this? If you would like to do this, we would then refer the church to a company that does donor wealth research. Now, you may just Google the subject and you may pick your own vendor. I don't have a financial relationship with the companies that I refer to, but I have derived a great deal of benefit. For instance, once again, my coworker, Daryl Prater, was hitting a home run. He was doing either the 3rd or the 4th campaign in a row for a church that had a crushing debt. And he suggested that we do wealth research. And like most people in the church world, they're unfamiliar with that concept and were hesitant at first, but they spent a couple $100, and they found that one of their active members gave $100,000 per year to the KU athletic department, which is wonderful. It's generous, and KU has wonderful athletics. However, they were only giving about $100 a year to their church. Noting the discrepancy, we thought, very common sense perspective, well, perhaps we could invite that person to become more deeply involved in planning our capital campaign. So we started out very gently, and we set up a series of listening events with the pastor and with the people that populated the top levels of our donor pool. And there was no fundraising that went on. It was just the visioning process that we talked about in the previous step, where the pastor presented the challenge and asked for input. That's all that happened. And the pastor worked their way through the entire church. The bigger the donor, the smaller the event, but virtually everybody was invited to something with the same two-part agenda. We have a challenge. What do you think we ought to do? And the challenge was debt. And I like to brag about Daryl and his results. The previous capital campaign raised $2 million and Daryl raised $3.5 million. And it was based on this model. And it cost less. The fee to the church was less for the consultant in the $3.5 million campaign than in the $2 million campaign. So doing the right thing really does seem to work. So how do we gather information about potential leadership donors? Well, it's all publicly available information. We're not allowed to access someone's personal private tax records. But if they gave a $100,000 donation to KU Athletics, their name is listed in the KU Athletics annual report. It's a charity. There is an annual report. Corporations also have annual reports, as do the governmental entities that manage those, not governmental, but rather the oversight organization, like Dun & Bradstreet, which is a credit assessment organization. It would list who the directors are and the owners are. This gives us insight into potential leadership donors. So I would encourage you to give some thought to that and begin inviting those people. Just remember the national average for giving. If you attend a Catholic church, it's 1.2% of one's income. Protestant, 2.2%. So virtually all of us know the biblical invitation of 10%. Only 5% of the population actually does that. So, all of us have room to grow. And we know that giving is good for the soul. So let us invite those people to get more deeply involved. The next step, which is absolutely critically important, is to conduct a feasibility study. And to do so without a feasibility study, to do a campaign without a feasibility study would be like doing surgery without an x-ray. It just is not done. It should not be done. It should not be random. It should be extraordinarily deliberate. A campaign should be precise. It should be based on what we learn in the feasibility study. It takes about 6 weeks. We charge $14,000. If there are circumstances, you could make choices. The fee could be a lot less. It depends on your circumstances. Usually a report, here's a sample, might be 70 pages long, pretty thick, got some girth. It's got a whole lot of information in here that every single comment that we gather will be presented back to you. You can read every comment. They're anonymous. We promise anonymity because we would like honesty. And of course, one of the questions that we ask is, what amount would you consider giving? It's usually question 17. It's not question number 1. We begin with the real important consumer satisfaction questions. How well are we doing meeting your spiritual needs? Next question. What else could we be doing to better meet your spiritual needs? And we have lots of room for comments. The next one, believe it or not, is not spiritual. George Barna, the renowned Protestant researcher who coined the term church shopping, has informed us, as have many recent books, including one I like, which is called Bowling Alone. It talks about how right now social needs now are a greater priority to individuals who are church shopping than our theological considerations. So dogma has taken a second place to community. I find that fascinating as the world evolves around us. We had better be tuned into that. So are we a welcoming church? Do people have social needs that are unmet? Let us figure that out immediately. The average person, when they're church shopping, goes to visit 5 churches. So if you Google the term, you buy the book, you'll discover that theology does not rank as highly as friendliness, welcoming people, the personality of the congregation. So That's that second set of questions, is how are we doing? Then we shift into, are you aware of the plans? Did you participate in plannings? What do you think about the priorities that have been set out? Give us your honest and direct feedback. It is anonymous. And then we begin talking about fundraising, and we begin talking about volunteering. Would you be interested in being a volunteer? Here are 6 different committees that you might be interested in volunteering for. Prayer, event, thanks, youth, ambassador, communications. Here's what each one of them does. It would be an episodic volunteer opportunity. And what episodic volunteer opportunity means is it's not forever. It's for the life of the campaign. Now, our target here is the 85% of your population that's not deeply involved, that's not on a committee right now. We don't want to put them on a committee forever. We want them to have a fun experience of getting more involved in their church, because that results in generosity. So one of our outcomes is we get a whole bunch of volunteer names that come out of that. Now, I've got a statistic for you. That's the next to the last thing that we're going to cover. This is called the number 1 secret. And this secret comes from the Fidelity Fund that began this research in 1979 about the giving patterns of wealthy Americans. And we discovered that the giving pattern of the wealthy follows and corresponds with everybody else. So it has given us some real insight in how do we stimulate generosity. And it's all within that category of being related to volunteerism. A real critical consideration that you're going to want to know that we discover is, how should we proceed? What specifically do we need to do and not do to raise the maximum amount of money? How much can we raise is a critical question that can be answered. So when we do a feasibility study, we compare your results to 100 other similar churches. We compare and contrast, and then we're able to come up with a quite accurate forecast. The dollar forecast, our accuracy rating is above 95%. So that's pretty wonderful. I mean, you can kind of bank on it. You can know this is how much we're going to raise, and this is how it's going to come in. And that influences everything from getting loans to the size of the capital campaign and the size of the building project that you're thinking about. You know, even though I'm a big old guy, I still think of myself as being a delicate flower. I'm hypersensitive to potential problems. I want to know about them way before the capital campaign, and I want to deal with them way before the capital campaign. So the feasibility study, you know, buried in these pages, in these thousands and thousands of comments and the sea of numbers, are insights into potential problems that we want to get on this minute. You remember Peter Drucker? If you took a marketing class in college years ago, you heard Peter Drucker. Good marketing makes selling superfluous. And that's what we want the capital campaign to be. When it's time for a commitment, we want that to be a slam dunk. We want that to be the easiest thing. We want the ripe apple to be falling off the tree at that point. We don't want unripe fruit that's hard and indigestible. We want to time it just right and have all of our problems solved before we begin, so that the ask is a borderline afterthought. We want it to be superfluous. The main outcome of your feasibility study is that you've got a campaign plan that lays out in detail, what are we going to do first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and what particular questions and concerns do we need to address right now so that we're a success then. The number 1 secret that I've mentioned a couple of times began with this Fidelity Fund study on the giving patterns of the ultra wealthy. And what they discovered was that active volunteers give 11 times more than those who are uninvolved. Forgive me for leaving out the un, okay? So an active volunteer gives a multiple of 11 times more than those who are not involved. So if we did a capital campaign workshop and I only had 1 sentence, this would be the sentence. If you need to raise a significant amount of funds for a special project, then involve people, engage them, be creative to find ways to connect them with the capital campaign. Your feasibility study will tell you what to do and how to do that. And this theme of engaging people is critical. Now, I would refer to the Gallup polling study titled the ME25, which examines the engagement strata that's common today. They've got thousands of churches in their profile of whom then their sample size. So it's statistically valid, and you probably will recognize right away it might be worse than you were thinking. You remember in the old days we used to think of a congregation had 1/3 that was involved, 1/3 moderately, and 1/3 on the outer ring. Well, it's kind of worse now. 15% they say are deeply involved. 50% are moderately involved, and 35% are uninvolved. They're on the bubble, they're on the way out. Church attendance has changed over the years. Now, if your average person attends on average twice a month, you are doing well. Remember in the old days, we used to think it was every Sunday and maybe Sunday school too. Well, it's a different world. Now, unrelated to these engagement statistics is something I found very comforting. They came up with the term CAVE, C-A-V-E, as a significant cohort within every church body. And it's only 1%, but it's a slice across each of these three rings. And what they discovered is that 1% of the church-going populace, and I don't know if this expands to the population in general, but certainly does to the church world, that they will object to everything, and they will call you to the carpet, and they will be confrontative. And it's not because they're hostile, it's just how their brain works. And this 1%, remember, this is a bunch of scientists who are statisticians and actuarials, and they're brilliant people. And they tried to think of an easy to remember term for that 1%. And you probably recognize this. CAVE stands for consistently against virtually everything. Now, I, of course, thought that was hilarious when I heard that, but then I realized, oh my gosh, I've encountered those people in every single church I've worked in, hundreds of them. And I know for sure that they're good people because they volunteer and they give and they're sweet and they're spiritual, but just their brains are wired a little bit differently from mine. They consider it a gift to confront and be contrary. And maybe we need that just to make sure we have our best game on. So be aware of that and don't be offended when you are confronted in that way. So the conclusion that I draw from this, if we have this inner core of 15% who are actively involved, and they're probably going to go across the economic spectrum, but it's only 15%. So what do we need? We kind of don't have to worry about them. They are going to be on board. So what do we need to do? We have got to figure out that 85% who are giving modestly or not at all. And then we've got to engage them with episodic volunteer opportunities. Now, they think, the average person thinks they are volunteering. They have an experience of expressing themselves, defining themselves as a volunteer, even if it's the most modest way of defining that. I would draw now upon the most seminal work of insight into our field, and that's why the title of the book is Why Catholics Don't Give, by a person named Zech, Z-E-C-H, from Villanova. And this researcher and his lab studied why Catholics give at the lowest possible level, 1.2%, and Protestants give at 2.2%. What's the big gap? Why? Let us dig into that and discover why Catholics give so pathetically. And we have tremendous insights into that. And among them, leading the way, are engagement. So what do we do to facilitate engagement? It is so much better to have 20 announcements and 5 bulletin paragraphs and 17 emails and a phone tree to come up with 10 volunteers to clean the church on Sunday after the big event. It's so much better to go through all that work rather than pay a maintenance man $50 to do the work. Why? Because the person volunteering might spend 45 minutes doing it, but their internal experience is they have given of themselves. Now, in that book, Why Catholics Don't Give, one of the insights, the little slivers that I think is extraordinarily meaningful, is that a church that has an assertive welcoming program, which means everybody's on the welcoming committee. If you see somebody you haven't met, go introduce yourself. People who have churches that have an assertive welcoming program, have giving that is 9% above average. So when I see myself as a volunteer, I give more. So 11-1. So let us find ways to engage people beginning today. Now, my wife accuses me, as you know, of going 0 to boring. But let me quote my most arcane resource, which is The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind by Julian Jaynes in 1966. He was an anthropologist and a brain scientist, and he examined cultures. And the thing that was most important in the transmission of wisdom was the presentation of a question, and the question going from the young person to the elder seeking wisdom. So that act of questioning is the best way we can engage people as volunteers. So I remember one of my first campaigns, St. Regis, the pastor was brilliant. Once a month, the pastor during announcements would say, hey, the facilities committee is working on new covering for the entrance. If you'd like to give input, stick around after Mass, because they'll be here to listen to your concerns. Mass ends, people, half the people run like the church is on fire to get out as quick as they can. About half stuck around. And then the leader of the committee would come forward with a flip chart and say, here's what we're thinking. What do you think? Give us your advice. Took 10 minutes. Every month they had something. The feasibility study is a way of asking people questions to get their input. The consensus building process is a way of asking people questions to share their wisdom with the church. So when a person shares their ideas, they feel like they're volunteering, they become engaged, involved, and they have a sense of ownership. The term episodic volunteer opportunity is there in all capital letters because it is not a permanent commitment. It is episodic. It's an episode, has a beginning and an end. So let us do easy ways to engage our people that are not time expensive. And they internally have a conversion experience where they go from modest random giving to elevating their sights from their moribund ways to become one of those 11 times greater level of giving. And it's all based on this one simple secret way of proceeding. Now, let's say you decide to skip this. What you have done and just go right for the ask is, and that's what traditional fundraising people do. They skip engagement and just go right for the ask. And that is like attempting to harvest without planting the seeds and tending the crops. And it is ill-conceived and unwise and short-sighted. The low-hanging fruit might be easy, but gosh, it's just the low-hanging fruit. What about the rest of the fruit? So typical fundraising only focuses on the 15% who are active and ignores the other 85%. I say, let us engage the other 85%. That's why we raise the most amount of money. It's more work, it's more time consuming, but golly, do we raise a ton more money. Okay, I'll get off my soapbox. Next up, since if you're working for a church of prayer is the central thing. And we want to facilitate people's faith life. So how are we going to do that? Today, there must be a constant stream of stewardship activities that begin through your bulletin, happen through social media. They are announcements. They're part and parcel of the life of the church. So we want to constantly have something in every single communication that we send out. That's important that we not define stewardship as fundraising. It's a shift in thinking. It is not give, give, give. Rather, it is discern God's will in your life. So I feel real lucky, after I had that gun to my head and in a foreign country in a war zone, that kind of hit a switch inside of me that just was like, well, okay, what can I do to make the world a better place? How can I work with God instead of contrary to the well-being of God and man, humanity? And if that's the essential stewardship message. So our bulletin, our announcements, everything has to follow that basic stream of energy and thought. So if you don't have that, I will give it to you if you subscribe to the stewardship system, which we give away to everybody, whether or not you hire us to do a church capital campaign. We have thousands and thousands of people using this every single month. You can just cut and paste. So we have a monthly column. We just literally cut, a weekly rather column. They just cut and paste it into your announcement. And it's just a reflection on stewardship. And it's a delight. You always want to offer scripture as a basis, as a guideline. We want to have no more than 4 sermons per year on stewardship. It's very interesting, but it turns out the monthly speaker, the volunteer, turns out to be the most effective way of communicating stewardship. Now, I'm going to share with you a spectacular statistic, and then I'm going to ask Stephanie if we have questions that have come up, and I'm going to look back at my sheet to make sure we have covered our 3 dominant concerns we got out of our early survey. Under this final bullet, monthly speaker on their faith journey, we have a 20-year longitudinal study from a group of about 100 churches in Wichita who did this one thing. They just had a monthly speaker that did not ask for money, that talked about their own internal discernment process, about prayer, stewardship. And now, that was in the pre-video days. Now we would videotape every single one of those and email that out. But it was 3 minutes. We give them 3 questions. It's a script that they've got to answer in their own way. 3 very specific targeted questions. Number 1, how has God blessed you? Number 2, how do God's blessings flow through you? So you're a conduit for God's blessing. So we're reframing this whole prayer thing from, dear God, bless me, to dear God, you have blessed me. So how might I be a conduit for those blessings? So we really want to reframe how people think of stewardship. So these 3 questions help that. So number 1, they're in their exposition, they'll talk about how's God blessed me? How do God's blessings flow through me? And then number 3, how did my life change when I became aware of this stewardship paradigm, that I am meant to be a conduit for God's blessing? Now, fortunately, we have an enormous amount of research on that 3rd topic. One of my favorite books on that subject is Give to Live by Gregory Lawson. In that, he cites a survey. It's the most analytical thing I've ever seen, but apparently people who give more than 2% of their income have a higher level of T cell production in their immune system compared to non-donors. Isn't that interesting? I mean, is that not proof of mind over matter, or spirit over matter? Isn't that fascinating? So in a way, we are serving our constituents by encouraging generosity. And these 3 questions, we know there's this thing inside of us called mirror neurons, where we relate. If someone's telling a story that we can relate to, we resonate with them. I mean, we're all connected on a spiritual level, but that resonation happens through authentic stories. So I would encourage you to begin this right this very minute. So every one of us has a phone, and it's got a little video camera on it, and it makes videos. Begin today with 3 minutes. Find people who are comfortable and willing, and they can do 20 takes. It doesn't matter. You give them these 3 questions, give them a couple hints, ask them to record their video and send it to you. Since we're largely online now, and we're going to be online forever, I just read a statistic yesterday. 71% of baby boomers cannot wait to meet again in person. However, Gen X, only 41% are looking forward to meeting in person again. Now, I have a wonderful client in Atlanta that's the most delightful experience I've had. I don't know, I'm not going to say in my whole life, but maybe. And it's so cool because this church, it's a Catholic church, and it adjoins Martin Luther King's childhood property. And the people love each other. I mean, and it's not a little tiny church, gigantic church. Love the pastor, love the vision. They're building a new church. They are all of one mind and working them. I should be paying them. Don't tell them, but I should be paying them. It is just such a delightful experience. Actually, I have 2 wonderful clients in Atlanta right now. The other one is incredible too. They're buying, this is a story of the hand of God. They're buying their first church property after renting for 15 years. And out of the blue, they got a 10,000 square foot property plus 5 acres plunked down, Peachtree Corner, beautiful part of Atlanta, and it's only $1 million. It's got to be worth $5 million. It's just a gift from the hand of God. Okay, so forgive me for diverging. So the prayer activities facilitate a person's evolution. Your best speakers are your lay volunteer speakers. If you give me a shout, I'll send you a video, a training video. All right, so Stephanie, let me pause and ask, are there any burning questions that I need to address? I'm looking down at my sheet. Financial forecasting, financial parameters, decision-making, and the calendar. Do we have any burning questions I need to address?
We don't have a particular question, but there was great interest in the calendar.
Okay, well, let's shift to the calendar. But before I move on here, I'm going to shift to the calendar here. Of your financial concerns, our goal with everybody is to raise 3 times annual giving in 3-year pledges. Of course, we want to raise more than that. We want to shoot for 7 times, but the industry norm would say 3 times annual giving is a good one to respect and a place to begin. How much will it cost? The national average for all capital campaigns, whether it is a church capital campaign or nonprofit capital campaign, the ratio between expenses and revenue is traditionally $1 spent for $10 raised. That is the industry norm. I would happily send you the research and the books that quote this statistic. Send me an email. Our history as a firm is better than that. Historically, our charges have been $1 for 25 raised. Pardon me.
Dennis, I do have a question for you now.
Okay, fire away.
Mary Jane asked, what is the name and the author of the book that you just talked about on giving?
Oh, Gift to Live by Gregory Lawson. And I have it just right there on my bookshelf. I can't see it, but I've got it right there. Give to Live by Gregory Lawson. It makes a scientific case regarding how we are really servants of our donors. And for them to give more, they experience a flow, a term coined by Mahaley, Csikszentmihalyi Mahaley from University of Chicago, who took over Maslow's hierarchy of needs, identified self-actualization as the pinnacle. But there has been research beyond then, beyond Maslow, and the term flow. And then there was a book titled Flourish. And at the moment, I cannot remember the name of the author. I'll remember it in a minute, I'm sure. But for people to change their mindset from me to I'm connected to the world and I become the tide that lifts up all boats. People prosper and people have a heightened immune system and heightened psychological well-being when they adopt that stewardship mindset. It's fascinating. Now, keep them coming. Interrupt me as I go. But the calendar of activities, let me make sure. Okay, financially, you know that you can statistically probably raise 3 times annual giving. And if we work hard and do all the right things, we're going to raise 5 or 7 times annual giving. Decision-making, I hope you got the message. It should be dispersed. We want to involve everybody in decision-making. We want to engage them, invite them, do round after round of gathering input, whether it is through the visioning process or as volunteers when they're making decisions how to run the campaign, the feasibility study. There is so much engagement in the decision-making process. The third subject that you wanted to hear about was the calendar. Now, we have covered all the components of the calendar. And let me just put them in sequence, okay? Number 1, get consensus on the plan. Get a planning expert who has been through this before. Please engage them. If you have to pay them, just to make sure that if you need one, let me know. I've got a person. She is located in Nebraska, but works all over the world. But you need a professional. You can find them in your town if you would just do a little bit of digging. Number 2, identify your potential leadership donors, and I want you to be very deliberate about engaging them. Okay, ask them for their input. Make sure that they've been invited to the town hall meetings and participating in the surveys. And if they don't, then assign someone to go out, target it, and get their input. Call them on the phone, look them up, send them an email. Be deliberate about engagement. Why? Because active volunteers give 11 times more than the uninvolved.
Dennis, I have a question, and it relates to number 4.
Okay.
The question is from Cynthia. What type of volunteer activities can we offer to church members now since we can't get together because of COVID?
Oh, that's a really good question. A lot of people hate Zoom. I don't hate Zoom. I love Zoom. Why? Because boy, does it make engagement easier. The best, the best system for engagement relates to engaging them psychologically so that they give you input on decision making. So if I was Cynthia, I would find ways, I would find questions, and I would be very deliberate about inviting people to help me think through decisions. Creating a Zoom meeting is quick and it's easy, and it fits the definition of an episodic volunteer opportunity. So let's say you're thinking about, you've got a building need. Let's say you're planning a new need. Let's say COVID has interrupted that. And you have all these complex factors going on that are whirling about. If I was Cynthia, I would identify my top 10, my top 100 donor prospects. And every week I would select 5 of them, send them out an email and say, hey, Sunday afternoon after church, could you just stick around and come in this other Zoom meeting and just brainstorm and give me some advice? It does not take long. In 10 weeks, you could work your way through all top 100 of your top donor prospects. And I am certain that there are many complex issues that are facing your church, as that are facing every single church. So,
Jenna, I
yeah.
have another related question from Mary Jane. Besides Zoom, is that the only option? Do you have other ideas besides Zoom?
Yes, but I'm old and I do this thing called phone calls, and I do them all of the time. And they're not time consuming. They are not a headache. I don't have to set anything up, but I make a lot of phone calls, and that works as well. And it could be 3 minutes or 5 minutes where you, the pastor, or a lay leader, a volunteer leader, somebody in charge of a ministry who's identified these top 10 prospects or top 100 and call them on the phone and say, hey, I'm thinking this through. I wanted to get your input. Okay. The phone is a terrific blessing. It is a terrific tool. And if it's a leader calling a member, there's a high probability if you don't get them, they're going to call you back. So have on your mind a constant need to engage, to ask their input. What should the next theme of the newsletter be? Could we talk about stewardship? How should we get people involved in revising our plans for the new building? What kind of prayer? What's your favorite scripture for illuminating this subject? There are 100 things that you could use input on. So email, Zoom, phone calls, social media, do a survey, do a Survey Monkey survey. You can do them on a regular basis, targeted, and it costs you nothing. So I would encourage you to adopt the mindset of constant engagement, constant activity. Now, among them is number 3, the feasibility study, where we want to sit down in person with a very deliberately with our top 10 and a cross section of the remainder of the congregation, where we ask them 20 questions and we take notes. It might take an hour for every single one of those interviews, but boy, is it extraordinarily important. Boy, do they own the campaign after that. So in the calendar of activities, number 3, the feasibility study is going to take about a month, maybe 6 weeks. And from that comes your campaign plan. Now, when you hire a consultant to do a church capital campaign, this is the first thing that they do. And you only pay for the feasibility study. So I've done feasibility studies where the recommendation was don't do a capital campaign. About 1 out of 20, the answer is no. And it's a bummer when that happens. Sometimes you don't have to do a capital campaign. Sometimes you do a feasibility study and enough money is offered during the feasibility study where we just recommend, okay, just send out an all call to say, okay, we need X and you guys said you would give that, so just please give. And then you've saved a whole bunch of money. A feasibility study, this thick document will give you a ton of insight into what you do next. It is the basis for your campaign plan. It is absolutely critical. Number 4, engaging member and episodic volunteer opportunities. You got to put on that mindset. Just remember that statistic. An active volunteer gives 11 times more than a non-volunteer. So embrace that and live it and just figure out a way. And they don't have to be on a committee. It can be 1 minute of volunteering. And then the 5th in your calendar of activities, and the 5th priority, the others are higher priority. but begin this regular stream of stewardship education related to prayer, discernment, membership education, volunteer speakers, videotapes, not videotapes, just video that go out to educate your people, storytelling and lifting up their sites. Now, these are all doable things. They're not very expensive. I mean, if you're about to raise $1 million, these things are minute compared to what might come out of it. And I have had every manner of disaster, which I have learned from, and I've had every manner of blessing as well. And just every single campaign I have worked on with the hundreds of church capital campaigns I've done, just very regularly, we have gifts from left field where just one story resonated with one person at the right time, and generosity flows forth. I'll conclude, we're about done. The funniest one was a church just 1 mile from my house. That was, talk about easy and fun to go to. And I'm tall, I'm 6'2", and the pastor was about 5'2", and a brilliant person, very articulate, as a male. And after worship, after some of these activities, a woman who was my size came to congratulate the pastor. The pastor did not know the woman. She patted him on the head, literally looking down, said, "I'm just so proud of you doing your planning and your exciting stuff. Here's a little something to get you started." And just tucked a check in there. And the pastor just was in shock, having never, and the pastor had this beautiful hair too, and never really had that happen before. And just jaw dropping open. Didn't know what to say other than, "Well, thank you, and good to meet you." Later on, gets the check out. It's $250,000. I think that's awesome. That is totally awesome. Oh, okay. All right. So we got to wrap up. We're over time. I am sorry for going over. I get so excited about this subject, as you can tell. Next one is about the spiritual side, about the discernment process. And we'll go in through some detail and tell you a lot of stories, a lot of examples about how the focus of prayer is never about more money. It's never about fundraising. It begins with gratitude. Thank you, God, for blessing me with all that I have. And reframing it from a marketing perspective to rather being a conduit. I'm in the flow, as coined by Mahaley, Csikszentmihalyi. And the discernment process, which really is decision-making, which has a whole lot to do with wisdom. You know, Aristotle said, if you're making a decision, analyze the heck out of it, consult experts, and then number 3, ruminate upon it. So we want to facilitate rumination through that regular discernment process. We'll provide you scripture and resources. We'll talk about how you can use volunteer leaders to help with the prayer and discernment process. We'll give you publications that you can use, and we'll have a calendar of activities just related to the discernment process. Now, Stephanie, I see your beautiful background and your happy face. Does this mean you're going to jump in, or should I talk about the webinar after that?
Well, I was going to go ahead and mention that. So first, I want to say to everyone that I will send out this recording and the slides, so you'll get that email in about 24 hours. So if you wanted to look something up, maybe we went too fast on something. If you're interested in past webinars we've done, you can go to our YouTube channel, Church Development, or you can go to our website, churchdevelopment.com. There's a slash between church and development, and you can find them there as well. And plenty of other resources at your disposal. And that also includes our upcoming webinars. So our next one is 4 weeks from today. That will be on March 10th, same time, on stewardship prayers. And then the following month in April will be on the 14th, again, a Wednesday at 11 o'clock. That will be a comprehensive system for our capital campaign planning. We're going to have a panel of people, architect experts, someone on finance, someone who does structural planning, and stewardship experts. We hope you can join us again.
Yeah, we hope you can make it. Thank you so much for joining us. If you have ideas for other webinars, please send it in. We see ourselves as constantly in the midst of that flow. We talked about sharing with you all the ideas you can implement so that you have a successful church capital campaign, growing regular stewardship. And the third, of course, is gifts through one's estate plans. Please let us know. Give us a call if we can help you prepare for your church capital campaign. Thank you, and God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. God bless.
Bye-bye.